So today we want to talk about LRI's governance practice. And this is the work that we do with boards of directors, with public agencies, with publicly elected boards, with appointed boards, oftentimes of large state agencies, utility companies, commissions, city councils, and so forth, where governance plays such a critical role in the functioning of the organization. So one of the key things we start with in any of our governance engagements is a situation assessment, trying to understand what is going on from a governance perspective. And we know what to look for when we think of governance that is working well and what we think of when we think of governance that is broken. So when governance is broken, we know board members tend to think that their role is not well defined, that they're rubber stamping, that there's a lack of good communication and trust between the board or the commission and the chief executive. And we know from the chief executive's perspective and the executive team's perspective that they also feel that governance is not working when they feel they have too many bosses. Every one of those board members is giving them an instruction and telling them what to do. And a lot of time is spent trying to interpret what is it that the board wants when board members are all speaking with such different agendas and with such different priorities. So when governance is effective, board members agree on a basic system of governance and agree on what the roles and responsibilities of the board are and the roles of the chief executive are. So we try to develop governance systems then, governance frameworks, if you will, that spell out those roles and responsibilities in enough detail to make sure that each side of the equation is clear. There are three forms of governance that we typically work with in our client engagements. One is the so-called Carver Model of policy governance, in which there are four distinct buckets, if you will, of policies. These are ends policies, executive limitations policies, what we call board staff linkage policies, and governance process policies. Each of those distinct buckets means something, of course. Ends policies are those policies that define the results that the organization is trying to achieve on behalf of the constituents that the board represents. Executive limitations are those things that define what is it that we can't do. What are the things that, in delegating authority from the board to the chief executive, that we're saying we don't want to have happen, those results we don't want to see. Governance process policies are those policies that define how we work as a board, and the board staff linkage policies are those policies that say, here's our delegation of authority to the chief executive. The second approach that was developed by the Aspen Institute is called Coherent policy governance. Coherent policy governance is essentially the same model of four different buckets of policies framed slightly differently. There are results policies, operational expectations policies, there are governance process policies, and again, delegations policies to the chief executive. Now, we have found in the work that we do with many of our boards and commissions that neither of these two frameworks is particularly effective when so much is defined in the negative, defined as thou shalt not. These are the executive limitations under the Carver model in particular. So we came up with a model called strategic policy governance, and strategic policy governance has three different types of policies. Those are strategic directive policies that set the results the organization is to achieve, board governance policies that define the role of the board and the role of board members, and board staff linkage policies that define the delegations to the CEO. In strategic policy governance, there is a clear circle of and flow of governance from the board defining its expectations on behalf of the customers and owners it represents, a flow of policy delegation to the CEO to achieve specific results, a monitoring of those results, and then back through the board to re-articulate as it sees fit, whether the policies are fine as they are or need to be redefined. Now, I want to talk a little bit about some of the principles that underlie policy governance and the governance approach that we take. Three of the principles of policy governance are that the board steps back from managing the how to really focusing on the what, that the board speaks as one via written policies, and that the delegations to the CEO clarify the roles and enable the board to stay focused at a high level. Furthermore, the board establishes high-level values, goals, and performance measures that enable it to track how well the organization is doing. These policies are well organized in an easily accessible, modular fashion. And then the CEO interprets the board's policies based on his or her judgment of how best to achieve the results the board has articulated. Now, a few lessons that we've learned in developing and implementing these systems of governance in different organizations. One is that all the board members need to be involved in determining these policies and setting this direction, as well as in monitoring these policies and direction. If you have too many subcommittees and committees where the work is chopped up and divided amongst those committees, you won't have the same coherence as you do if the board is functioning more as a whole. Secondly, as you look at the structure of board meetings and committee meetings, they need to be structured in such a way to take care of the work of the board as defined in these policies. So that means regularly monitoring ends policies, strategic directive policies, and making sure that the work of the organization is unfolding as it has deemed best. Furthermore, the strategic directives need to be seen by the board as a stable set of directives that the board has approved, speaking as the board. Individual board members may have quibbles with the strategic directive, may have a departure in terms of their point of view, but it's important that every board member support the board-approved policies. That's part of the fiduciary trust that a board member carries. And only by accepting that that's a stable set of directions can the CEO then responsibly manage the organization using those policies as the basis for going forward. Now, if a board member thinks that the policies need to change, then once he or she gets a majority of votes and a new policy is approved, then that new policy is the law of the land, and the CEO must respond accordingly. Let me conclude by saying three things about the advantages of using a governance framework like the strategic policy framework. One is that when you do have the board clearly setting direction from the very top, it does an amazing job of alignment. So the entire organization, from the CEO through the executive team to the very front lines of employees, are aligned around a clear set of expectations of what the board wants. That enables people to really be clear on priorities, to set aside unimportant work, and to make sure that in the monitoring process, the board is getting the information that it needs. The second advantage of this process is that it enables the board to really take a leadership role. So even though they are laymen, often coming from other kinds of professional backgrounds to serve on the board, they still have a very clear idea of the leadership that they're exercising and can talk about that leadership in ways that enable them to be good spokespersons for the organization and to show leadership with the constituents who elect them. And third and last, the advantage of this system is that it creates a sense of harmony and trust between the board and the chief executive officer and the executive team. Gone are the days where the executive team and the CEO are trying to guess what board members want. Instead, they have a clear written set of policies that define those desired results and enable all of the distrust that can undermine governance to vanish and to really enable the organization to function at the very highest levels. So I look forward to hearing from you. If you'd like to hear more information about our governance practice here at LRI, the slide on the following page will give you the contact information. Thank you for listening.